Previously on the Multiverse of Marvel Podcast. All right, everybody, welcome to the Multiverse of Marvel Podcast, where each week our resident Marvel guys, Aaron and Dan Grindlay, will dive into a crazy corner of the ever-expanding Marvel Multiverse to see which topic we'll be discussing this week. Welcome, guys. How are you guys doing this weekend?
Not pretty good.
That's good. That's good. How is the pandemic treating you guys? You almost back to normal now? Because I think in our part of the world, it's
pretty quiet here. Yeah. Well, kids are back to school. Work's been normal-ish. I mean, I guess. Until we can go back to fan expos and Comic Cons and whatnot, it's not going to quite be normal though.
That was one thing that was rough. Like a couple of weeks ago, for that. This is the first time since I started going to Fan Expo.
Yeah, you had to miss it. Yeah.
The first one was 2011. Yeah, it was kind of fun missing both, but I'm not the guy. I'm not complaining because, like, as you both know, or who have ever been to a con, you get like the dreaded con sickness on a normal weekend anyway. So, like,
exactly. This would be a nightmare right now.
That'd be nuts. Yeah, because even that's what happened to, I think it was Will Wheaton friend that got super sick at a con one weekend, and it kind of became a germaphobe of sorts and will like touch people at cons, which is understandable because he got like super duper. It wasn't just like normal stuff. It was like super duper like sick or something or something like that. Which so he's almost as I made the joke a little while ago. I think Howie Mandel had the right idea the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so the general idea for this is just get a general Marvel update for everybody. So I think first off, we'll start off with a little intro to all of us, and I think we'll probably start with Aaron. What kind of got you into comics and kind of on the Marvel train, as it were?
Well, Daniel and I never really had a point where we were like, oh, these are what comics are. They were just kind of always around. Like, our parents had collections of a lot of the Saturday morning cartoon stuff, like the newspaper strips. Those were always on our shelves. They were always there for us to look at. But the big introduction to the Marvel stuff outside of like the Spider-Man cartoon, which was ubiquitous when we were all kids. Whether it was the 67 one or the 90s one, you had to have been exposed to some sort of Spider-Man cartoon as a kid.
Because before the MCU kind of exploded, if you said somebody to the normal person, name 3 comic book characters, it would be like Batman, Superman, and like Spider-Man, and maybe switch in X-Men every so often, sort of thing. So
we will get to a certain point in covering all this Marvel history where we get into the animation stuff and show how like they've been into that racket for a long time, actually. But getting back to the introduction stuff, one of the first moments I can recall for like, hey, here are more than just the cartoon characters you've seen. When Daniel and I were real little, family friends of ours had a pair of adjoining cottages. Was it Gold Lake, Dan?
Oh, I couldn't remember. I'm so young. I couldn't.
Well, it was one of the lakes that we used to.
One of the many lakes in on Ontario.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Narrow it down.
Well, Adam, you went to Brownsea Base with us.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it was one of the lakes.
No, Anstruther.
Anstruther?
That's it.
You sure about that, Dan?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it was, regardless, one of the camps one of the lakes we'd go through for camping at Brownsea Base. But anyways, before those days, we were at these 2 adjoining cottages, and in one of them, there was a bunch of these plastic 3-dimensional fridge magnets.
Yeah.
And there was like Hulk, there was Daredevil, Captain America. It was just a bunch of different Marvel characters that I'd never seen before at that age. Like, I was maybe kindergarten age at this point. And my dad was giving me the rundown of like, here's all these characters, here's what they do, here's why they're special. And that was like my first introduction to, there's more than just the heroes and villains we see on Spider-Man or on Batman. There's There's whole worlds. Because he also explained to us that Batman and Superman, they're together in the same stories, but they're never going to show up like in the X-Men stories or the Spider-Man stories.
Yeah, they have their own world over there, sort of thing.
Yeah. Dan, do you have anything to interject at that point?
No, the only thing I can really remember is that he also had the Captain America toy from the old Secret Wars wave. And I remember Dad talking to me about that, but again, I would have been like, what, 3 at this point?
Nice.
3, maybe 4, yeah.
Yeah.
But the next major thing I can recall, what actually got me directly interested in what the comics had to offer, was a couple years later. Again, cottage with family friends, this time up in Halliburton. Our family friends, the Slavics, which that name will come up again. They had friends that we hadn't met before, and their son was maybe a year or so older than I was, and I was the second oldest out of the group of us kids there. This older kid, do you remember his name, Dan?
I don't. Specifically, I don't.
Nah. But he had a bunch of the 1990 Marvel card series. And among them was the Ghost Rider rookie card, because they had just come up with the Dan Ketch version of Ghost Rider. And I remember,
which is the second Ghost Rider, I think.
When it comes to the supernatural incarnations of Ghost Rider, he's.
Oh yeah, because of the '50s guys just had a whole
he was just sort of a Western character.
So I guess third one,
but that didn't get retconned until years and years later.
Yeah,
but the '90s Ghost Rider is credited as Volume 2 in the Indica. The card series that was released early on was labeled Ghost Rider 2.
But for those listening who might not know who Ghost Rider is, he's the Marvel guy that has like the flaming head and the motorcycle.
Yeah, that's what got me going. Looking at this card, it's this flaming skulled, leather-clad, spike and chain bedecked, like biker type. And nice. I'm looking at it thinking, like, this card says that this is a good guy. He's got a skull. He looks like a bad guy. This is a hero? I don't get it.
It's one of those guys that looks like you should be like crawl out like hell or something like that to get the good guy sort of thing.
Oh, well, some incarnations, they have crawled out hell.
But it looks like he should be that guy, that character from the get-go sort of thing.
Yeah, and as the months and years went by, I started to accumulate more and more of these Ghost Rider stories, and was enthralled because this is incredible stuff that I had no chance of seeing on TV. Like, as the years went by, and they started to develop more and more of these Marvel cartoons in the 90s. Yeah. And I remember like hearing and reading the rumors, like, oh, they might be doing a Ghost Rider TV show. And then they came out with a Ghost Rider action figure line, and they were like, well, why else would they do an action figure line unless there was, a TV show to help promote the sales of the action figure line?
Yeah. Because that's basically what war shows were in the 80s and 90s, where vehicles.
Yeah, especially the toy lines that we got, right? They were all had to have a cartoon, right?
Yeah, but Daniel and I, our favorite 2 comic franchises got respectable toy lines from Toy Biz when we were kids, without the benefit of any significant tie-in. Like, Ghost Rider showed up in an episode of the Hulk. Generation X had the respectable TV movie from Fox as a precursor to the X-Men films that they would go on to do. It holds its place.
And did these show up in the Spider-Man animated series for an episode, Ghost Rider? I can't remember.
Not that I can recall.
He showed up in an episode of the Hulk, and I believe you see him once in the X-Men cartoon. He doesn't. He shows up in like Gambit's memories at one point.
They're scanning.
Oh, okay, So
it's sewers implied to be from the Brood feud in early issues of Ghost Rider and X-Men.
Does he hang out with Spider-Man at all, or a lot? Or no?
In the 90s, occasionally.
In the 90s,
not really.
But everybody did.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. I was just trying to fan out and why he wasn't
in the 90s. In the 90s, you teamed up with Spider-Man, Wolverine, Punisher, or Ghost Rider. It was those 4 characters.
You can't forget Cable. He was the other.
Cable.
That got constant guest shots to boost the sales of flagging titles.
Yep, that very true. Very true.
But the Ghost Rider stuff, at the time I discovered it, there was nowhere else you could enjoy those stories outside of the comics published by Marvel. And thankfully, that was one of the hottest series Marvel was publishing at that time, so it was easy for me to find in bargain bins for my meager allowances.
Yeah.
You want to take on from here, Dan?
Yeah. So, the first comic I can remember buying, Aaron and I went camping with the family, and parents took us out to a grocery store or something. We saw, the old rack comics, the newsstand ones.
Yeah, back in the day before there were really comic book stores or sort of thing.
Dan and I should point out here that we are part of the final generation of comic readers that had the benefit of just casually walking into your corner store, your drugstore, even your grocery store, and finding racks of comic books.
Yeah, the backers around the house, around corner from our house, always had comics on the rack, always.
Yeah, and not just the Marvel and DC stuff. You'd occasionally find like Dark Horse comics and a few of the other. It was before the Image days, typically, but yeah, you'd find just comic books. Sad that those days are long gone. But yeah,
it really should come back.
Yeah, as Daniel was saying, we were at the grocery store. We were each allowed to pick out a comic. I picked out an X Factor, and Dan, what did you pick out?
Bill and Ted.
Oh, nice.
The Evan Dorkin series, which I highly recommend to any Bill and Ted fan. It may be non-canon now with the new movie, which I still need to see, but for the time period, like being the only thing we got of worth following Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, because I watched the cartoon occasionally as a kid.
Oh yeah, that's right. There was a cartoon. Okay, I
wasn't making that up in my head. Failed live action, but yeah, out of all the expanded universe stuff, Evan Dorkin's comic series was fantastic. It was really creative and adventurous. Dan picked a good first comic.
Now,
I think it was issue 2 that you got, where
I think so.
Death decided, screw
he quits.
I'm tired of my job. I want to go on vacation. And he steals one of the booths.
Yeah, that's it. But I would have been like 6 or 7 at that point when I bought that. But that didn't quite make me a comic fan. It wasn't. What did it was the original X-Men toys. The Slavics there for Christmas. Their dad bought pretty much all of us the original Toy Wave. We all, between 4 of us, we all got Wolverine.
Yeah, with the Slavic family, there was John and Trish, the parents, and Brandon and Stevie, who were like close to our age. Dan and Brandon are actually weeks apart in age, and Stevie is younger. But we spent all our time together as kids playing. And John, their father, was a bona fide comic geek. We found awesome comic books just lying around their house.
A fan of Alpha Flight back in the 80s, Right? He collected Claremont comics back in the 80s.
He was definitely a Claremont John Byrne fan.
Yes, classic, both classic, comic people, yeah.
But
he
go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Were you at Fan Expo a couple 2 years ago when was it John Byrne showed up?
No, I wasn't. I haven't been there for a few years. Who was it the last time I went?
I don't really pay attention to the celebrities at the cons. I go for expanding my collection.
Yeah, that's what I do. And then if there's somebody there that I have stuff that gets signed, I do that.
If I get a chance to say a kind word to a creator whose work I've enjoyed, I'm glad to. Especially if it's something where they may not have gotten proper appreciation for it.
Yeah.
Something where like a particular series, Evil Ernie and Santa Fe, might have been absolutely terrible writing-wise, and I say that as a fan of Alan Grant. But the artwork was fantastic, and I was happy to tell the artist to his face, like, hey, great work on that comic. But that's it for me caring about artists and creators.
Yeah, I think the John Byrne line was my my one Saturday thing for the time, because I didn't want to walk around. It's like I'll just sit in line for a couple hours and not have to move. So able to get like a couple of things signed and got something signed for a friend. So
that's pretty cool.
I did get laughed at by Peter David directly in the face at one point.
Yeah, that was funny.
So Dan, being a fan of David's Star Trek books, had a few questions to ask him, and there was nobody around his booth, so he was happy to confirm a few character pronunciations and stuff. And when Dan was finished asking his questions, I just casually asked, "Hey, what are the chances of you doing any more of Jim Starlin's Dreadstar comic?" And he just threw his head back and laughed. And it was a good-natured laugh. I didn't think he was laughing at me. Years later, I kind of figured out why he was laughing, because Jim Starlin released Breed 3, and then there's Dreadstar in that. So Peter David clearly had to keep under his hat the secrets he knew about what was coming. But yeah, he laughed directly at me when my question, which was awesome.
Oh, there you go, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, we should probably get back on here a little bit. So like I said, X-Men wave, right? Well, then a year later, the cartoon starts. So, I mean, everyone around our age in the 90s, boys were watching that, right?
Yeah, classic mid-90s Marvel animation, the X-Men animated series. Very classic intro to, I think, Joe Perry from...
Yep. No, he did the Spider-Man one. He did the Spider-Man one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so, I always... Yeah, that's right, Spider-Man, yeah. Sorry, I always got it, because both had solid...
solid openings, yeah. But, I watched that for a little while, and I already started buying comic books. At this point, I was mostly picking up, the occasional Robin comic book or something like that. Yeah. But, the X-Men cartoon, Colossus wasn't a main character. He only showed up later in. Same with Nightcrawler and Archangel and all that. And the toy line had taught me about them. Yeah. So, I had to pick up the comic books to find out more about these characters. And then, what do you know? I like the comics. And I kept buying them. And then Generation X starts. And, this would have been 94. I started reading it about a year or two in. And then that became my one comic that from when I was like 11 or 12 until the comic ended. Every month I bought that comic.
And what's Generation X again?
So it's the 90s X-Men spinoff of, a bunch of kids being trained to be X-Men.
Student book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So one of the student books.
So are they out of the school or are they like elsewhere?
It's a separate school. It's still the Xavier School, but it's a separate one
near
Boston.
The Massachusetts Academy.
Yeah.
Oh, so just a different location, but same idea.
It's a boarding school. Is it owned by Emma Frost?
Yep.
Okay,
it was where the Hellions, her previous team, used to live and all that. And back at that point, it actually was a straight up boarding school with humans and everything too.
Back in the New Mutants days.
Yeah, exactly. But because of the characters look so cool, and I was a big fan of a lot of them and the interesting stories, and I love Chris Bachalo's art. He's my absolute favorite comic artist of all time. So I was on board for that until it ended. And then around that point, I kind of floundered with comic collecting because I just didn't know where to go, and I then found out about how good Chris Claremont's classic X-Men run was from 75 to 91.
Yeah,
I think you got an essential of that stuff to start you off.
Not quite. No, I think before I got the essential, Comic Shed closed.
Right, and we got.
And then I went ahead and they had the clearance sale. I went ahead and cleaned out like a chunk of Claremont comics. I didn't have any solid runs or anything, but enough that I was like, had all these different periods of time to read, and they were all great. So, spent the next few years filling in the gaps to the point where I don't really have much more left to get because I've kind of got all of it. But I mean, that made me the hardcore X-Men fan and kept me buying them modern, because at that point Claremont came back to the comics as well. So I started buying monthly, and I've had to slow down now because, being a father and owning a house and all that stuff, I still pick up the occasional thing, but my collection is pretty solid from like 1975 until 2016, 2017, somewhere around there,
Collecting comics does get expensive.
Oh, it does. And it's like, I have a list that I've done for the last, 15, 20 years. It's a file on my computer where I've been keeping track of all the X-Men comics and what order they all go in for my orders, because my order is all chronological and not by title, right?
Yeah.
And looking at how, I can start of it, skip for the very start and scroll down a bit and say go from 1963 when X-Men started down to 1975 when the next team joins in. And it's not that much scrolling. But then you get to modern times, you scroll from say Civil War to Secret Invasion, and you're scrolling down for pages and pages and pages because there's so many titles and that came out at the time, right?
Like so many tie-ins.
So many, right? But hey, that's part of collecting comics, though, right?
Yeah, true enough, yeah.
Now, my absolute favorite comic is a creator-owned title by Joe Kelly and Chris Bachalo called Steampunk that they did around the year 2000. They didn't get to finish it. They made it 12 issues, and then it kind of ended. And I got to actually speak to Bachalo once and ask him about it. And he says that, the two of them plan on finishing it at some point, but both of them are so busy with other work. And Chris is
supposed to go to the moon. Yeah. They were going to go to the moon in that comic. But Steampunk Adventures on the Moon.
To the Moon, Atlas.
Marvel apparently keeps Chris Bachalo really, really well. They take really good care of him, so he's busy doing all the work for him and doesn't have time to do his own creator-owned stuff. So
yeah.
I'll patiently wait and hope that one day maybe they get a chance to finish it. You know,
he slows down and is able to do his own stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. And other than that, you know, I'm a big Brian K. Vaughan fan. I have been since Chamber's my favorite X-Man, and he wrote the Chamber miniseries, which I thought was wonderful. And since then, I went on and kept reading all the rest of stuff he's done, from Runaways to Ex Machina to Saga and Paper Girls. Like I really enjoy his work, and I'm a big fan of Elephant Men. The Richard Starking's futuristic comic about transgenic humanoids that are made animals and stuff, whatnot. Great comic, fantastic.
Like Blade Runner crossed with Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah. And then on top of that, I've been a Ghostbusters fan since birth, so I can't do anything but recommend the current Ghostbusters IDW comics, because as a Ghostbusters fan, I think it's kind of the best stuff since the original movie.
Nice.
We've got a fellow friend from our scouting days. He's a big horror geek, but not a comic geek.
Yeah.
He's finally gotten to reading the Ghostbusters stuff in trade, and he agrees that it's some of the best
Very nice
adventures that he's found.
Very nice.
But yeah, that's been my comic adventure there. I'm out at the point where I'm the, in the 30s and a dad, so I'm trying to teach my kids. And
start passing on. And
my daughter embraces it fully. She's totally going to be a nerd. I mean, she is. My son, he enjoys that stuff, but he's
Pokemon comics.
Yeah, he's pretty single-minded in what he likes, and right now it's Pokemon. So
he's little. He's got time to grow.
Yeah. I think I just passed the. I was just a little too old for the Pokemons when it first came out. So
I was 13. I was 13 when it came. Or no, I turned 13 shortly after it came out, I think. Or something like that. My dad got me Blue for my birthday right when it was brand new, and because all the other guys at school were playing it. So I've played it lots, and right now my kid's playing the old copies I have of like the remakes of Gold and Silver. Yeah. But it's funny because he asked me all these questions. I haven't played anything recent, so I can't tell him anything newer. And he's at the point where he probably knows more than me, but he keeps asking me questions. And it's all stuff like, when does this Pokemon evolve? When does it learn this level? Can it do this? Stuff I can't answer.
Be like, back in my day, there was only 12 Pokemons.
So I did the whole buddy.
We were glad for it.
I said to my sister, I'm like, buddy, look, I'm playing Red Dead. Look at all the stuff I have to remember about that game. And you see me playing that Fallout game and all the stuff I had to remember for that. And those Batman games you see me play. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, and then look at all the other games I've had and have played. And I'm 30 and I've been playing games almost all my life. I can't remember everything. There's no way I can remember everything.
What do you mean, Dad?
Yeah, but that's just not possible.
The Pokemons.
Anyway, though, let's hear from you, Adam, and how you got into comics.
So for me, really, I think one of my third or fourth earliest memories is me running around in my backyard with a Spider-Man costume, like you get from like the old drugstore ones, where that has like the mask and like the white elastic with that like Richie hair out, and there's like the kind of paper but kind of plastic sort of thing.
Yeah, the weird sort of vinyl smock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So so it's like I said, it's probably like 5. I was just talking to my mom during dinner, and I think it was like 5-6 years old when I was doing that. So I had a general idea of Spider-Man then, and then I think I've said this before, and then like I think for Christmas one year, is probably soon after that, is I got the Fantastic Four and Incredible Hulk origin stories, but it was like this little plastic like vinyl record player sort of thing, and there's like the plasticky records for it or sort of thing, and they had just like the 90 because it was probably like mid to late 80s, so it was probably like the OG stories for both. Sort of things. Yeah, so I kind of had like a general idea of what superheroes were, but I don't think I had an idea that they were comic books until probably when I saw the Batman '89 movie come out, and because I remember that being a huge deal. And then I think the same year the Ninja Turtles movie came out, and I don't think I knew it was a comic until later on, and then I was able to put it all together. So and then in like the mid '90s with the Spider-Man and X-Men animated cartoons is really what introduced me to like more than just Spider-Man and X-Men in their cartoons, because like throughout like I think Spider-Man was 4 to 5 seasons.
Yeah, 5 seasons.
Yeah. So like they had like Blade, Stephen Strange show up, even they had Wong in there, and then they did like the Secret Wars, and they actually had the X-Men crossover.
Yeah, X-Men.
I can't
Iron Man, Fantastic Four.
Horribly censored Morbius.
Oh, plasma!
I
need plasma.
Oh yeah, the plasma. Oh, that was pretty bad. Yeah, but at least they had
But at least they had him, right? I mean, at the same time, he's one of the Marvel characters.
Morbius, but the censorship was just so.
Oh yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah. Even as a kid,
like, 90s with guys with their laser guns all the time, because you can't have real guns unless you're Batman the Animated Series or Gargoyles. And even then, Gargoyles had their limits.
Yeah, and Morbius had those sucker things on his hands.
Yeah, on his hands. Yeah.
Instead of biting them, so I guess that was.
Those aren't in the comic anywhere.
Yeah. So now that you mentioned that, I'm sure that's probably why they just do that, so they can suck out the plasma without like doing the sexy biting or whatever.
Yeah.
No biting and no reference to blood.
Exactly. Yeah. So because what 12-year-old knows what the fuck plasma is really, right?
Yeah.
It's not like by that age kids hadn't already read stuff like Bunnicula and already been introduced to. Vampiric concepts at such a young age.
I mean, how many kids' cartoons have had vampires show up in an episode or so, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But and then I think because of the Spider-Man cartoon is when the Blade movie came out. I actually knew that it was that he was a comic book character instead of just being like a horror,
a random character made up. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, because I don't think it was advertised as a comic book movie. It was like a action horror type movie with sexy vampires kind of thing.
Yeah, they didn't really start pushing things being comic book movies until after that first X-Men movie, which was a year later.
Exactly. No, I think it was 2000. Yeah, and Blade was
a year later,
98,
late 98 or early 98. Either way.
Yeah.
Didn't happen until after X-Men because people said started taking them a bit more seriously, even though Blade was fantastic.
Exactly, and I always say that because of Blade, how it may not have been like it blew up or anything, but because Blade was such a good movie, I think that's what led to X-Men.
Oh, absolutely.
But of course, everything kind of blew up with X-Men, and then shortly after that was Spider-Man, and then. Everything
Fantastic Four and everything kind of blew up, and we ended up with so much crap before Marvel finally settled it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so but I think that's what all kind of got me off on the Marvel thing, because I said with the Spider-Man X-Men thing, there was the first time I actually got into like somewhat of the backstories of Marvel instead of just being like.
Well, one of the things that helped too was that both the Spider-Man and X-Men cartoons actually would adapt real stories too, right?
Because like I said, like there was there's Stephen Strange in there, so he brought him out and that, which eventually led to a good Clone Saga stuff and the Secret Wars as well. So I said that all kind of wrapped up, and think you guys brought up earlier is that having the X-Men cards in the early 90s around the same time is because I remember seeing I got one for Christmas one year and seeing the X-Men card one, and it referenced the Fatal Attraction storyline where Magneto had ripped out the exoskeleton or whatever, and the
adamantium out of Wolverine's bones. Yeah,
exactly. And then he went kind of feral for a bit and all that stuff, and I was like, holy shit, that you can do that. Because I think that was in and around the same time I saw the animated series, because I kind of knew that Magneto was magnetism kind of guy, and I kind of knew that Wolverine had the adamantium, so I was like, holy shit, they can.
Yeah, I think Fatal Attractions I think was 93. It was right around the 30th anniversary.
So they probably would have done the show like shortly, in the series like shortly thereafter. So
the show started in late '92, so the show was still pretty new at that point, right?
Yeah. So So I think with all that, because I remember seeing that card and then linking it to Magneto and Wolverine, I kind of at one of the comic book stores that's across the street from the BMV that I told you guys on Blu-ray. I think I picked up the Fatal Attractions hardcover there, just solely because of that card, and I had looked up and seen what storyline it was from, because I don't think it said what storyline it was from. It just said that at one point that's what happened.
It happened, yeah.
Yep.
It wasn't like one of the later series where you can get those big puzzle cards that have the whole picture where you see it all happening, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I just going with all that, and then once I got the job at ATN, the TV station I was working at in Newmarket, I finally was able to actually start reading comics because as I always said, always likened myself to Jim from American Pie, where he said he was like the band geek that never joined the band, where I was like kind of like the comic book nerd that never read comics until I got that job where I was able to actually finally afford comic books and whatnot. So because like the couple guys that I work with that when I first started working there were around my age, and it was during just at the beginning of the summer. So they were going to Fan Expo that year, and then we're talking about doing that, and they're actually cosplaying as villains from the Batman animated series.
Nice.
Yeah, so like the one guy was Bane, one guy did Penguin, and one guy's brother did Black Mask, and the Riddler. I think were the four of them.
Nice.
So talking with them, getting all excited because I think I had heard about Fan Expo before, but never really knew what cons were. So and one of the guys said that like I lived around the corner from the comic book store. So I was like, all right, started talking about what kind of stories I should start reading, and then they're kind of my into comics sort of thing, right? Because I think before that, and I didn't really have a in because I don't think I grew up. I didn't really know anybody reading comics.
It generally helps, right? You know, when I started working with a buddy at when I was working at Staples years ago, and he was into comics too. It's sort of like a Nightwing, because he had me being a friend and advising him stuff. Now it's years later, and he still keeps up on Nightwing every month.
Yeah.
He's hated it for the last 2 years, but I mean that's because Nightwing sucked for the last 2 years.
Yeah. So there was always that like bit of some stories lies and whatnot. But I think that it was really how I got into comics, and then like I think the last couple of years I've been realizing I haven't been really reading much on Marvel. It's been kind of more DC what I've been reading, so that's why I've kind of thinking of starting this podcast is just to kind of get back into the Marvel thing, really.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to a couple of guys who pretty much only read Marvel as kids.
Yeah. So that's
we'd read DC stuff.
That never really led to collecting other Batman stuff.
You'd read Lobo occasionally.
Yeah, I collect Lobo, but that again, outside of stuff like the Demon, it doesn't really connect to many other.
Not really.
Series.
I mean, even now in my collection, I've still got a good chunk of Robin, but I got a good chunk of Green Lantern and some Batman stuff, but not really a lot much else, you know, apart from trades for like Batman and Green Arrow and a few things.
I got a bunch of Jonah Hex comics. I got the Swamp Thing stuff by Alan Moore and a bunch of other stuff preceding that in my collection. But yeah.
But then on the other hand, you look at Marvel between the two of us. I mean, you look at Marvel between the two of us, and we've got a good chunk of it covered.
Yeah, between all Dan's X-Men, my horror stuff, and all the various other bits and pieces that we've collectively accumulated for a decade and a half, 2 decades.
We both have collections of Avengers, but they're not the same eras of Avengers, so that kind of fits in together too.
Yeah, so it covers everything sort of thing,
There's parts of my collection that just comes from stuff that Dan collected bits and pieces of, or I collected bits and pieces of, and just slowly coalesced into a larger chunk of comics. I got at least one long box that's full of various events and crossovers and just different major things that happened in the Marvel timeline.
Very nice. Yeah, no, I'm really starting to look forward to looking into what the Marvel version of like the crises are and whatnot. So be interesting.
It's quite a bit different.
I imagine much more than that, but I just seen
the main difference is the genesis of the two comic book universes are very different. DC universe starts to splinter very early on as soon as DC editorial decides, hey, let's tell stories involving Superboy. And then Siegel and Schuster are saying to them quite clearly, well, no, this doesn't fit. Our Clark Kent didn't become Superman, didn't put on the costume, didn't engage in any heroics until he moved to Metropolis. All these stories of him as a teenager, they don't fit. So that's when DC suddenly okay, our Superboy is Earth 1, your Golden Age original Superman is Earth 2. And then it just splinters and fractures back and forth as the years go by. Whereas with Marvel, with Stan Lee overseeing so much of the original output of the 60s, like he's only working with a handful of writers, and one of them is his own brother. So there's a lot more. Yeah, Larry Lieber is one of the early Marvel
that's right.
writers, and that's Stan Lee's brother. But because there's a lot more cohesiveness with the writing and editorial at that point, Marvel stories stick together a lot better. They don't really have to go back and fix things and re-explain things.
They also would have instances back in the days where, you know, an event would happen in one issue of a certain title, and you would somehow hear about it in other titles, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, one issue, Spider-Man beats somebody there, and in another comic somewhere else you hear on the radio where they're talking about the battle.
Or
nice.
I can remember reading through Fall of the Mutants, and at one point they're talking about all the snowstorms that are being caused over in Thor by the casket of Ultimate Winter being opened.
Oh yeah, that's another story I still need to read is Fall of the Mutants.
Fall of the Mutants is cool.
Yeah, I haven't. I started like 3 or 4 times, but I haven't like finished it yet. It's like another huge.
Yeah, because you got 3 separate stories and 3 different titles that don't tie into each other in any way, shape, or form.
And a lot of that's lost when you aren't necessarily following all the lead up to it. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but the Life Death stories come before.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, Life Death 2 leads right into Fall of the Mutants, I believe.
Yeah, those are pretty major.
Or it might be even part of it.
There's stuff happening in and around there, like the Cool and Gath's takeover of Manhattan.
Which is still about a good 30 issues before that.
Oh, yeah, but that's the nature of Claremont's writing. It was so...
True enough. Stuff flows in together so well back in those days.
And again,
really, Claremont's one of those runs where you read from the start of it and you read it through till it ends. It's
17 plus years. But again, that's what made Marvel so much different than DC and more appealing to young readers such as Daniel and myself. I can remember getting random DC comics like Batman stories and whatnot, and reading it, not really understanding what's going on because the previous part of the story was somewhere else. And then when I get to the end of the comic, the next part of the story isn't in the next issue of Batman, but it's often some like Detective Comics story. And should we find out we got that, then the next part of that story is often Robin. It became too challenging to collect all this different stuff, whereas if I was reading Ghost Rider, I could just read Ghost Rider. But then in getting into that mythology, you find out all the stuff from the 70s. Werewolf by Night, Tomb of Dracula, the original Ghost Rider, and if you so choose to, you can branch off and to follow all that stuff.
Yeah,
but
all that fun stuff.
It's never, up until the last few years, it never got to, Marvel continuity never got to such an overwhelming, convoluted state where they had to start resetting everything the way DC did. Like, Crisis on Infinite Earths came because DC had layered so many different stories on top of each other that left things so convoluted they had no choice but to try to set the playing field back to an even level. Whereas at the same time, Marvel's doing Marvel Superhero Secret Wars because they want to sell a line of action figures.
Yeah,
that's the main impetus for Superhero Secret Wars. They had an action figure line, and they just wanted a story to tie everything together in a neat package.
Yeah, and then the last like 10 years, DC has tried to reboot their stuff like 3 times already.
After Crisis, we had Power, and then there's throughout the
Final
Crisis on Crisis on Crisis.
And then there's like Flashpoint, which made the 52, and then Doomsday, which kind of fixed all that. So
even since before Doomsday Clock, there was Rebirth and a bunch of other weird ones too, right?
Yeah. And a lot of the times when stuff happened that made me take notice, it was so quickly undone by the next big event.
Exactly. Everything's too close together.
They're doing stuff like, so I mentioned before I like Lobo. So in the Brightest Day stuff, there's a couple of issues of Green Lantern where Atrocitus gets tracked by Lobo to Earth, and Lobo starts kicking the crap out of the various Lantern members.
Right.
It's just a quick 2 issues, but it's like classic Lobo action. Awesome. He's just beating the crap out of these guys the way it should be. Great. But then after that next reset, we get that Twilight-esque emo Lobo thing that
yep.
I'm more me than the original Lobo that, was revamped by his original creators to be what he was. Like, yeah, 90s Lobo isn't what pre-Crisis Lobo is, but still Keith Giffen.
Good old 90s Keith Giffen.
One of the stranger artists to follow in terms of style, because he's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Ever tried reading his image series, Trencher? That is, it's unmistakably Keith Giffen, but it is some of the most busy and cluttered artwork I have ever seen.
Good times.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's basically my intro into comics and Marvel and whatnot. So I think for the first episode that should cover everything for all three of us. So and then the guys aren't on social media or anything, no?
No, not really.
Couldn't care.
Yeah, but as I keep on saying, that's the best way to go with that. But if you want to get in touch with the show, we are on Twitter at the Marvel Pod, on Instagram at the Multiverse of Marvel, and anywhere where you can get podcasts at the Multiverse of Marvel Podcast. And until next week, if you want to hear a little bit more of me, producer Adam, I am on 4 episodes of Off My Shelf podcast, where the host goes through her movie collection and talks about 2 movies each episode. And I'm on 4, so I think there's a couple Kevin Smith movies in there, Constantine, and I think Dude Where's My Car and Dumb and Dumber, where that was the last episode I did. And I'm on 2 episodes of Jumping Off Bridges, which is just one that old college friend is doing, or just kind of bullshit for a couple hours on the 2 episodes. And I'm also producing a podcast. There's Nobody Here Named Josh, which my old college roommate hosts. And we just pick a topic each week and talk about that. So check out all those out. And until then, really, read the comics, folks.